Pardon the interruption of some of the most beautiful opera ever. Actually, the first opera that I ever enjoyed by Richard Wagner. Richard Wagner. We need to interrupt these divinely stimulating vibrations because there's a deeper story here. Gruesome. Part of a much larger gruesome story and system of oppression of the Jewish community, of bigotry, of death. Not all for which Wagner was to blame, given that he was such an influential figure in 19th century European music, and really all art and the broader human expression of humanness. It's a pretty big deal that he believed what he believed, but he created some really unfortunate effects. And that's why today we're going to take a deeper look into Wagner's beliefs and the way his beliefs drove his creative direction. In other words, why he believed what he believed and how he crafted his art to express and promulgate his beliefs. Wagner, as he will be referred to in the rest of the video, was born to an ethnic German family in Leipzig, who lived in the third unit of what was called the House of the Red and White Lions in the Jewish part of town in 1813. This is important. Log it away for later that he was in the Jewish part of town. Richard Wagner was the ninth child of Karl Friedrich Wagner, who was a clerk in the Leipzig police service, and his wife, Johanna Rosine, the daughter of a baker. Now, the thing is, Wagner's father, Karl, died of typhoid fever 6 months after Wagner's birth, and afterwards, his mother, Johanna, lived with Karl's friend, the actor and playwright Ludwig Geyer. Johanna and Geyer likely married in 1814, although no documentation of this has been found in the Leipzig church records. But the point is that she and her family, including Richard, moved to Geyer's residence in Dresden in 1814. All the way until he was 14, Wagner was known as Richard Wilhelm Geyer. So for most of his childhood, he almost certainly thought that Geyer, the man from the Jewish part of town, was his biological father. He didn't know, though, about whether Geyer was Jewish or whether Geyer was his father at all. But one more time, we'll log all that away for later, come back to it. Just know that he didn't know. And what does the unknown make you feel? Fear. Ooh. Okay, so following with Wagner's upbringing, Wagner took part in Geyer's performances and developed a love for theater. Later in 1821, Geyer died, and Wagner was sent to a boarding school in Dresden at the expense of Geyer's brother. And at the age of 9, Wagner was hugely impressed by the Gothic elements of Carl Maria von Weber's opera Der Freischütz, which he got to see Weber actually conduct. At this period, Wagner started to write plays, strongly influenced by Shakespeare and Goethe, including his first effort, the tragedy he called Leopold. Wagner was determined to set it to music and persuaded his family to allow him to take music lessons. By 1827, the family all returned to Leipzig, and in 1829, he saw a first performance by dramatic soprano Schroeder Divrient, and she became his ideal fusion of drama and music and opera. In Mein Leben, Wagner wrote, "When I look back across my entire life, I find no event to place beside this in the impression it produced upon me," and claimed that the profoundly human and ecstatic performance of this incomparable artist kindled in him an almost demonic fire. In 1831, Wagner enrolled at Leipzig University, where he became a member of the Saxon student fraternity. Little known fact, his beliefs began to take root first in left-wing politics at this time. He later became very involved as a socialist. But at this university, he took composition lessons with Theodor Wendling, and Wendling was so impressed with Wagner's musical ability that he refused any payment for lessons. He arranged for his pupils' pieces to be published, and Wagner started seriously composing, including his first symphony in C major, his first opera, Die Hochzeit, which he never completed, and many others. Now, fast forward through a period where Wagner racked up debt, ran away from it, to Paris, where he made most of his money writing little articles and novelettes. Leave it to French people to call a little novel something as cute as a novelette. But the only thing we gain from looking at this period, as far as it pertains to this study, is that he got really good at writing in this time. So we fast forward, zip all the way up to 1840, when Wagner completed Rheinsee. It was accepted for performance by the Dresden Court Theater, so Wagner picked up and moved to Dresden. And his relief at returning to Germany was recorded in his autobiographic sketch in 1842, where he wrote that, "En route from Paris, for the first time I saw the Rhine, with hot tears in my eyes. I, poor artist, swore eternal fidelity to the German fatherland." So at this point, let's check in. There's self-questioning, probably bordering on self-loathing because bastard children at that time were still highly condemned. And simultaneously, he's building a pride in his country. It's starting to simmer underneath all of that. Okay, moving on. So So Wagner lived in Dresden for the next 6 years, eventually being appointed to the Royal Saxon Court as the conductor. And during this period, he staged his first 2 of his 3 middle period operas. Wagner also mixed with artistic circles in Dresden, but Wagner's involvement in left-wing politics abruptly ended his welcome in Dresden. Wagner was active among socialist German nationalists there. He was influenced by tons of other people's ideas, including Proudhon and Feuerbach. Excuse my pronunciation of all these German words. I don't speak German, but I'm doing my best here. So, he's living in Dresden, and widespread discontent came to a head in 1849, when the unsuccessful May Uprising in Dresden broke out, in which Wagner played a minor supporting role. Warrants were issued for the revolutionaries' arrest. Wagner had to flee, again, first visiting Paris and then settling in Zurich for years, where he at first took refuge with a friend, Alexander Müller. Wagner spent the next 12 years in exile from Germany. He had completed the last of his middle period operas before the Dresden Uprising and now wrote desperately to his friend Franz Liszt to have it staged in his absence, which Liszt conducted in 1850. Nevertheless, Wagner was feeling grim, isolated from the German music world and without any regular income. In 1850, a wife of a friend, Karl Ritter, began to pay him money out of her pension until 1859. Wagner even plotted an elopement with her, which her husband prevented, logically. Meanwhile, Wagner's wife, Minna, who disliked the operas he had written, was falling into a deep depression. So Wagner fell victim to ill health because of overwrought nerves, which was what his friend Ernest Newman credited it to. And this made it difficult for him to write. So, he's getting nervous, he's throwing his love feelings around, the guy's going through a lot. And not dissimilar to when he was in Paris, he starts writing a lot. But this time, it's not commissioned. This time, he's just free to write whatever he wants. And that's when all the dark stuff comes out. Wagner's primary published output during his first years in Zurich was a set of essays, The Artwork of the Future and A Vision of Opera, Gesamtkunstwerk. Gesamtkunstwerk, which means total work of art, in which music, song, dance, poetry, visual arts, and stagecraft were unified. He wrote a third, Judaism in Music, and this is the dangerous one, in 1850. It was the first of Wagner's writings to feature anti-Semitic views, and he originally published it under a pseudonym. And in this, Wagner argued, using traditional stereotypes and anti-Semitic abuse, that Jews had no connection to the German spirit, and were therefore capable of producing only shallow and artificial music. According to him, they composed music to achieve popularity and thereby financial success, as opposed to creating genuine works of art. Cite David Conway's book, Jewry in Music. So he could have completely just been projecting his own fears about being a Jewish person or of Jewish descent, maybe because of experiences he had as a kid growing up in that Jewish neighborhood where Geyer was from, maybe just simply because he was scared about the unknown origin of his DNA. And over the years of stress and trauma and moving and being in debt, being chased out of town, exiled from Germany, maybe he's only writing this stuff to get chummy with the German people who hate Jewish people. So he's like, hey, let's hate these guys together so you can let me back in. One more thing that he writes in this period of exile is what he calls a communication to my friends. And this included his first public announcement of what was to become the Ring Cycle. In it, he says, I shall never write opera more. I have no wish to invent an arbitrary title for my works. I will call them dramas. And at a specially appointed festival, I propose some future time to produce these 3 dramas with their prelude, in the course of 3 days and a 4 evening. So, Wagner is writing anti-Semitic stuff, he's writing revolutionary stuff, and he's writing some downright pretentious stuff. Stuff about this new, all-encompassing art form while he's composing the Ring Cycle, the first opera of which is called Das Rheingold. Now is when we start to transition into the way that his prejudiced views start to manifest in his creative direction. The way that these views steer where he's going and the way that he wants to express himself in his operas. So in Das Rheingold, the chief of the Nibelungen race of dwarves, Alberich, and the main antagonist driving the events. Alberich in Das Rheingold, gains the power to forge the ring after renouncing love and stealing the gold of the river Rhine, of which the ring is made. Now, Alberich is a composite character mostly based on Norse mythology about gnomes and negative Jewish stereotypes, and his race is expressed and portrayed through distorted music and muttering speech. He's trying to say there's something kind of messed up about this character. Alberich and his fellow gnomes all walk with a stumble and a stagger, which is supposed to be characteristic of the stereotype rooted in the medieval myth that Jewish people have goat feet. Wagner even employs the alleged Jewish smell to evoke the images of a character. It's sometimes amazing to even think that people think there's enough truth in these stereotypes that they perpetuate themselves. You know, like, I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen a Jewish person with goat feet. Deep stuff that takes centuries to shake out. Fumes and noxious stenches emanate from the gnome outsiders, hearkening more to these despicable views Wagner expresses in his operas. But it's worth noting that many critics disagree with these assessments of the ring. But there are drawings of the popular character Alberich that affirm that, if not a full portrayal of a Jewish character, at least Alberich is strongly based on Jewish traits or Jewish stereotypes, and his place in the social scheme of the opera drama is an expression of Wagner's feelings about Jewish people. So after his composition of the Ring Cycle, the political ban that had been placed on Wagner in Germany after he fled Dresden was fully lifted in 1862. The composer settled in Biebrich on the Rhine, and it was here that Wagner started working on his only mature comedy, which he called Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg. He had a sketch for it back in 1845, but he really started to develop it when he settled in Biebrich. So Wagner's opera, Die Meistersinger, was an autobiographical story in which the genius hero Walther, Wagner's depiction of himself, breaks the rules of a song's construction and in turn creates masterpieces. The villain, Sixtus Beckmesser, represents Wagner's arch enemy, which are just the forces that insist on adherence to doctrine and tradition. Beckmesser, who is not a Jew and could not have been because of some situation with the guild in this opera, is an accumulation of 19th century anti-Semitic cliches, the personification of every unsavory aspect about Jews gathered by Wagner. Specifically, many of the ones that we saw in The Ring, Wagner believed that Jews shuffle and stagger when they walk, their eyes squint, that they're belligerent, designing, unscrupulous, all characteristics that Beckmesser displays in the course of the opera. Furthermore, and most important to the character of Beckmesser, is his absolute deficiency of musical talent, his inability to craft poetry, and his lack of metric or rhythmic sensitivity, any one of which would have made him unfit to be a member of the guild. So we wonder, here's this guy, he's a member, but he's unfit, he's not qualified. So he's a part of the group, but he's not welcome there because of some characteristics or lack of musicality, lack of genuine musicality maybe. These characters are central characters in these operas. They're integral to his expression as an artist, his experience as a human on this planet. And this is why Wagner's music goes on to become the sound of anti-Semitic movements. But these core beliefs of his go all the way back to his childhood. They harken back to him really not knowing who he is and being scared of who he might be. For whatever reason, this fear, in combination with his life experiences, combined to create a couple of really messed up things that he said and composed into his music. So that's the history of Wagner's beliefs and the way his beliefs drove his creative direction. Thank you for staying with me on this tough topic, and I hope to have shed some light on the depth of this issue. I leave it up to you to decide whether to enjoy or condemn Wagner's music, but you can rest knowing more about the truth of the history of where it came from. Thanks for listening.